Hey, James Niggemeyer here. Just finished the FLW Tour stop number 1 out of Lake Okeechobee last week and had a good week. I made the top 30 cut, and so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what I did there, the baits that I used, and kind of what was going on both in practice and in the tournament. Throughout practice, it was definitely difficult to get bites. Seemed like you could get just a handful, 4 to 7 bites a day, which is, obviously it's pretty tough for Lake Okeechobee. Lake Okeechobee is obviously one of the best bass lakes in the whole country, full of big fish, and the water was cool. We had a really cool winter, and most of the country, and obviously Lake Okeechobee also had the brunt of what a cool winter we had. And so when we got down there, the water temperature was still quite cool, and generally the fish are grouped up in small areas. They're not spread out, so you want to cover water, but in covering water, you want to fish faster, but at the same time, a lot of times those fish, when it's cold like that, they're a little bit more lethargic, so you have to kind of do a balancing act. You want to cover water, but you want to also saturate areas, make multiple casts, and be able to fish your presentation in a slow manner where those bass can actually go and get that, and make sure that you're not fishing over a potentially large concentration of fish. And I really kind of narrowed down my practice to just a couple of key areas. Going into the tournament, I wasn't quite sure exactly what my potential was for doing well in the event, just because it seems like every time I go to Florida, you find an area where you get a few bites and maybe even get a nice quality bite, but this time I didn't get any really good quality bites in practice, so I wasn't sure if there were just a lot of little ones in there or what was actually happening. And obviously the conditions were changing throughout the week. It was warm, and it was continuing to warm, so you were thinking the water temperature everything was starting to stabilize. The cool nights were not that, the nights weren't that cold, which it all kind of played into the favor of fish getting, the fish getting into a more aggressive mode, and really the whole spring cycle really starting to turn into really, turn into making things better for all of us in the whole tournament. And I think a lot of guys were struggling with getting just a few bites in practice, and so for the tournament, I had selected this one area where I was able to get like 3 to 5 good bites in a general vicinity. And usually when you get 2 or 3 bites in an area, that's a good sign that you have found a concentration, an area that the fish are using. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how my tournament progressed. Day 1, I went right back to that area where I had found those fish and where I had multiple bites, basically 5 bites in one little area. And I started out with a bait that doesn't get a lot of press, would you say? Not a lot of people talk about it. It's a Strike King bait. It's called a Strike King Rage Tail Cutter Worm. And it's a swimming style worm. And I was rigging it Texas rig, Junebug color, Texas rig, 1/4 ounce tungsten weight with a little bobber stop and a 4/0 owner offset wide gap with a XXX strong, which is, you want that heavier gauge hook because you make a long cast, you set the hook, could be a really big fish. You don't want that. You want to keep the flexing down to a minimum, so that XXX strong really did that. And I was rigging it up with a St. Croix 7'4" Legend Elite heavy action rod with Cabela's Arachnid 8:1 gear ratio. You're fishing a lot of areas around Okeechobee with vegetation, hydrilla, reeds, and different things like that. So when you hook a fish, you want to be able to control them. A little faster speed on the gear ratio helps you do that, and as well as a lot of times you'll throw this bait out there and you're reeling it back, and a fish will come up behind it. It's kind of like a swim bait, kind of like a swim jig, but it works just like a spinner bait as well, because you're just throwing it out and reeling it back, and you can change your retrieve speed on that bait, which makes it great. But I was just doing kind of a medium speed, and the place that I found most of my bites was around just a big hydrilla flat. There were reeds in the general vicinity, but the hydrilla flat is what really gave me the most bites. And I would just throw this out and reel it back over the grass, kind of ticking it over top of the grass, and that little tail, it's got that rage tail design, and all those rage tail baits got a lot of action, and that thing would just, you know, just working through the water, works great, and it's a real subtle bait. One of the beautiful things about this is you can throw it in any kind of heavy cover, and because it's Texas rig, all the cover just kind of comes off of it, and it helps you really to work it in and around cover without getting it fouled up with grass or debris or anything like that. But that bait right there was day one. That was day one. I had my biggest weight, it was 15, almost 16 pounds, and that set me solid into the top 30 cut for day one. And the bulk of my weight came on that rage tail cutter worm. And throughout the rest of the week, I actually used a bladed jig and kind of bounced between this and the bladed jig both, and the combination was able to keep me in that top 30. I obviously made the top 30 and then finished in 29th overall. The last day was a tougher day, just not getting the same number of bites. I really feel like I maximized the number of fish that I had in the area that I was working, and I tried to branch out and actually catch, you know, fish and use the same pattern in adjacent areas, and I did. I was able to get a bite here and a bite there, and majority on that cutter worm and the bladed jig. Those were the two patterns, or the two baits that I was fishing, and that was really the pattern that really worked well for me. I was using a 50-pound Tuf-Line braided line, and then I was using a Gamma 16-pound fluorocarbon material leader, and I was also tying it to an FG knot, and that helps it go through the guides real easy, and I can make casts, and I have the ultimate confidence that that's going to hold even with the biggest fish. One of the big keys for me this week in maximizing the area that I had to work with, had a lot of boat traffic. There was a lot of other competitors in the same area that found the same fish, and one of the keys was I had to make fan casts, because there were really no visual markers. There's a couple of clumps of reeds that added as landmarks, but I needed to be able to really fan cast and saturate the area. And so one of the big keys were my Raymarine electronics. What I did was, I was using a trail system on my mapping with the Navionics chip, and that enabled me to see where the majority of my bites were and the majority of my boat lanes were, and the areas that I worked and the areas that I didn't work, and it made me more efficient. It was a great start to a brand new year. So that's really my tackle selection, the pattern I was using, and the things that really worked for me down there at Okeechobee for the FLW Tour stop.